In this video, I'll explain how to produce a project charter document. I'll start with setting the scene so you know how a project charter is used and where it fits in the project lifecycle, as well as how it relates to the project plan, as you can use components from the project charter within a project plan, just copy and pasting them across. And I'll also walk you through how to complete a basic project charter template. So I'll use an example to complete a project charter. On screen, we have the typical project life cycle, starting with initiation. We then move to planning, which is really detailed planning. Then executing, monitoring and controlling, which is about implementing a project according to the plan we've just created. And then the closure phase, where we wrap up the project. The project charter fits into the initiation phase and is a project initiation document and will be used as a basis for producing a detailed project plan in the planning phase, as I just mentioned. So let's find out a bit more about initiating documents. When a project idea is first thought of, an initial brief of the project is usually developed. This could be handwritten or maybe something in someone's mind that they speak about verbally. At this stage of the project lifecycle, simple research is used to understand the project, and any estimates are usually high level or broad brush. So no detailed estimates are usually obtained at this stage. These are done if the project is approved and progresses to the planning stage. So this initial brief serves a few purposes, and one main one is to help the decision makers understand the project and figure out whether or not to approve it. This is usually known as getting approval to proceed or approval for project kickoff. For the project manager, it's a document that specifies key information about the project, such as its purpose, objective, some benefits or the desired outcome of the project, sometimes called a business case, and also importantly, the boundaries of the project, also known as the project scope. As a project manager, you'll either create an initiation document yourself, or you'll be given one from a senior manager to interpret and use to create a detailed project plan in the planning phase of the project lifecycle. Actually, in over 20 years of managing projects, I've rarely produced a project charter myself. I'm usually given an initiating document to use as a basis for producing a detailed project plan. My main experience with producing initiating documents was as a head of a large department in a global company. As in that role, I would need to identify projects and get them approved, and so therefore I would need to produce an initiation document to get that done. So while some project managers do them, most of the time they won't produce this, they'll go straight to planning. Now, it's important to know that initiating documents have several names, but they all mean the same thing. And there's some examples here. So you may have heard of a feasibility study or a feasibility report, a scope of works document or a statement of work, executed contract or a section of a signed contract, maybe in an appendix or an attachment, a business case or project proposal, or maybe a project brief or a project charter. In this instance, I'm going to take us through a project charter, but just remember the information in the project charter is very similar to all of these other documents. They all are the same thing with different names. Now, there are many different project charter templates available, so you might have been given one or use an internet search and you should be able to find a project charter template. So just to sum up, a project charter is a high level or rough plan for the project. It contains order of magnitude estimates, so that means they're very rough ballpark figures. It's usually a result of top-down planning. So, for example, a senior manager may say, I want something produced, and you've got X amount of budget to do it in, so some high-level statement about the project. And it's used to obtain formal authorization to proceed to the planning stage. So that means we don't spend a lot of time on it, otherwise it may not be approved and we've just wasted a lot of time on something that we're not going to proceed with. So you need to produce a project charter. Where should we start? So before you start to document your project charter, you first need to understand the project. So we don't race into populating a template. We do a bit of analysis and consultation first to understand what we're facing. So you'll be trying to understand two things initially. Who are the key stakeholders and what is the scope of the project? So even if you have some basic information such as an executed contract or verbal briefing, the best way to understand the project is to identify the key stakeholders and consult with them to analyse their needs, expectations, and requirements. At this point in real life, you would be asking a lot of questions and taking notes. If you're completing an assignment for a course of study, you would look at the case information or think about the project idea deeply and identify the key internal and external stakeholders that way. You want to clearly identify the inclusions and exclusions to your project, so what is in scope and what is out of scope. And as you talk with stakeholders and think about your project, you should be able to identify what is included and what is not included, and also the main deliverables. So I'm going to explain this further using an example, the same example I'll use to show you a project charter. So this is my example project. I've been given a project to develop some health and safety modules for a new staff at a company. And your project might be to renovate or construct something, or it might be an IT project or an event, for an example. But initially, you just want to think about what is the objective. In my objective, I also have a time frame and I've also been given a budget. So I've just put that into one clear statement so my mind's attuned with what this project is trying to do. So as I mentioned, the first thing I do is identify the stakeholders. So mine is an e-learning project for a company and it's to do with health and safety. So my internal stakeholders would be the project sponsor and the project team, but also the learning and development department, because this is a learning type of project, the health and safety department, because these modules are about health and safety and they'll have to help us out, and also the marketing and communications department, because they're going to be concerned about the fact that this is corporate communication and it needs to have the right branding or use the right templates. Additionally, there'll be the organisation's managers who oversee the employees, and the employees are the end users, and more specifically, new employees are the end users of this project. Yours might have others like the finance department or operations or different parts of the organisation. For the external stakeholder, my main one is an e-learning designer who I'm going to contract. So this has some procurement in it, and they're going to be producing the modules. So for your project, just think about who might be impacted by your project or who might have an influence or impact on your project. So this could be community, it could be, if you're doing construction, maybe neighbours, it might be local government, different authorities or regulators. So just think broadly about who could be impactful to your project. Now, thinking through these stakeholders leads me to the next part. So they've helped me to come up with some project boundaries, starting with key requirements. So when I think through these stakeholders, and perhaps I've had some conversations, these e-learning modules must be interactive and no longer than 5 minutes. And they have to focus on the most critical workplace health and safety responsibilities and risks in the workplace. And the actual topics are going to be provided by the health and safety department. So you can imagine I probably talked to learning and development and health and safety, and they've helped to understand that these are the requirements. There needs to be a maximum of 5 e-learning modules. So maybe everyone agrees that people don't like e-learning and we need to keep them fairly short. And the e-learning modules must be in the organisation's branding. So we can imagine marketing and communications probably insisted on that. And the last one is a technical one, that the e-learning modules must be SCORM compliant. That's a specific standard to enable training to be tracked and managed effectively on the learning management system called an LMS. In consulting with the stakeholders, we also have these ones. So In scope, or the inclusions, are designing and developing lots of 5-minute e-learning modules based on content provided by the Health and Safety Department. Graphic design and alignment to company branding standards are included. So we got that from marketing. We're also going to have to identify and use appropriate e-learning authoring tools, because in talking to learning and development, they said that they might want to update the modules down track. So we can't have that e-learning designer use some really weird program, because we're going to need to use it ourselves later. It has to be some sort of standard tool, something appropriate. In scope is also that consultation that we're going to need to do with the different teams, and also ensuring that the modules work effectively. That's going to be part of it. So in scope is testing and making sure everything's working. Out of scope or exclusions, we can't do any more than 5 e-learning modules. 5 is the limit, so it must not exceed 5. And deploying the e-learning modules to employees or staff isn't going to be done by us. Learning and development are going to do that. So we're just going to hand over these modules once they're up and ready to go on the learning management system. We're not doing any implementation. So also implementing a learning management system, a new one, or upgrading the current learning management system, that's not included either. So now we should be much clearer about what's in and out of this project. Imagine starting to try to produce a charter without knowing this information. It would be very difficult. The other thing I tend to do very early is produce something called a work breakdown structure. So after I better understand the project, I do this sort of work breakdown structure, and it just helps me to understand in a more visual way, in this instance, what's in and out of the project. It gives me an understanding of the scope. I have produced a separate video if you've never done a work breakdown structure before, but I'm going to just talk you through. Now, this one's been done in PowerPoint, but sometimes this could just be sketched on a piece of paper. That's good enough just to understand the project a little better. So if we look across the top, we can see that the project's called the WHS, Workplace Health and Safety. That means e-learning project. And the key deliverables across the top. So through all that consultation and thinking about inclusions and exclusions, this is what I came up with. So the first is to produce the e-learning modules. So the first deliverable is the e-learning modules. Second is integration onto the learning management system. And third is handover to learning and development. Now, some people will use project management deliverables across the top. So that first line where we've got 1, 2, and 3 might be initiate, plan, execute, and close. My preference is just to use the product kind of deliverables that I'll be handing over. Some people will be using phased deliverables. Mine are more product orientated here. So under 1.0 e-learning modules, that deliverable is the work package 1.1, design and develop e-learning modules. We know that the e-learning designer will be doing that through consultation. And 1.2 is testing the modules offline just to make sure they're working, everything's correct. And probably here again, we're going to use some of those key stakeholders to review and test and give us feedback on those modules before we finalise them. Under 2.0 learning management system integration, we're going to prepare the learning management system, so put a bit of information in for each module. We're then going to upload those e-learning modules onto the learning management system. And then once they're up there, 2.3, we're going to test them out, make sure they're working, that they're tracking properly, that everything's good to go. In 3.0, we're going to do the learning and development handover. And the main work packages here, 3.1, we're going to prepare some handover documents for them. And 3.2, conduct a handover meeting so we can show them what we've done, explain through the handover documents to make sure we've completed the project correctly. So I've started with these, and I'm sure you agree now, even looking at this work breakdown structure, that this project is very clear and we're ready to document into a project charter. So just remember, do this little bit of pre-work first, and it's going to make your documentation easier. So let's have a look at the project charter. So here I've picked up a basic project charter off the internet, you should be able to find something like this or make one yourself, or maybe you've been given one. So I put the project name up here, WHS e-learning project, and I got that straight off the top of my work breakdown structure. I've come up with an organisation. It's a mining company. The project sponsor here would be my manager. So I'd put my manager's name. I'm the project manager, so my name goes here. Now we have some document control here. So here I would put today's date and then the version number. I've just created the document, hence there's only one version. If later on this document were to be updated for some reason, then I would put version 2 on here and continue on with version control. I then have an area called project description. You might have something similar to this, or maybe project background, where we just explain why the project exists or what the project's about. So here you want to give enough information that someone that knows nothing about your project can understand what it is, why it's here. So I've put develop workplace health and safety e-learning modules, and notice we spell things out in full first before we use the acronym. So develop these e-learning modules for the induction of new staff as the organisation's workforce has grown by 30% in the past 6 months, with similar projected growth happening in the next 12 months. The organisation needs a more sustainable way to provide workplace health and safety induction to new starters. And I've just put a note that the project will incorporate consultation with those different departments to ensure that the e-learning modules are effective and contain appropriate content and branding. So you might need to provide a little bit more background information or context, and you can also provide a picture or image or artist's render to help someone understand your project. So the point is to get everybody on the same page. If yours is constructing something special, you might put like artists' drawings or something to show what the thing would look like at the end. I've then put in the project objectives, so to produce 5 workplace health and safety e-learning modules that are fit for purpose and ready to use for the induction of new staff, that are available on the LMS within 3 months at a budget not exceeding $25,000. So again, I just took that from my initial work, understanding the project. It's actually written as a SMART goal. So it's specific. It says exactly what I'm doing. It's measurable. So mentions there's 5 e-learning modules and mentions the cost, mentions a 3-month period. So quite measurable there. It's attainable because 3 months is reasonable to do this job. It's relevant to the project, and it's time bound because I have said that this needs to be done in 3 months. So if you have to write a SMART goal, that is an example of a SMART objective or a SMART goal. I've then discussed the deliverables. So through doing my work breakdown structure, this made my deliverables much clearer. So I've just picked the 3 from across the top. So design and development of 5 compliant e-learning modules, integration of those e-learning modules onto the existing learning management system, and handover to the L&D department. So I've just plucked the main ones from across the top. Sometimes in the deliverables, you might need to state some sub-deliverables, some smaller ones. It's just up to you and your project. Sometimes these will talk about project phases rather than specific products, as mine's more like product deliverables. We then have a few benefits. So here, try to have some compelling benefits to show why your project exists. For mine, I've just said it's more effective for an on-demand WS induction for new starters and to create a safer workplace. But if you have statistics or any hard data, you might include that in the benefits section as well. Then down to strategic alignment. This is how the project helps the organisation achieve its strategic goals. So I've said that this project aligns with the organisation's values of creating a zero harm work environment, which is specified in their 3-year strategic plan. So here you could refer to strategic planning documents, vision, mission, strategic objectives, values, anything strategic to show that your project should exist because it does align with the organisation's strategy. Now, one of the first things I did was to identify the stakeholders. So there's a place in here just to record that. So I've listed all the stakeholders, whether they're internal or external. And in this template, it asks for the role or the interest in the project. And so I've given a little bit of detail there. So, for example, the project sponsor's role and interest is that the project meets the objectives and regulatory requirements. So that's an interest. And the project team follows relevant processes and legislative obligations as well. So that's their interest there. So I've just put a few notes in here, going through all of those different stakeholders. We then come down to constraints. So this is anything that might limit the project, things you have to work around. So I've created a few here. One that we know of already is that the e-learning module length must not exceed 5 minutes. That was a requirement, and so now it's also a constraint. The second one, the e-learning modules must comply with relevant legislation. So obviously they're workplace health and safety modules, so therefore WHS legislation is going to be important, but we're delivering them out to employees, so we've got to make sure we're following employment law. We're producing something that is a communication and might have images and things in it, so we need to be wary of anti-discrimination legislation, the language and the inclusion. And lastly, we're probably going to be using some content and potentially some photos or pictures. So we need to make sure we're following copyright law. I put here that the budget is a key constraint. So the budget must not exceed $25,000. In your instance, your key constraint might be time. Maybe you're running an event and you've got a strict deadline, so you might put that as the constraint. I've taken the budget as the constraint for this one, although later on you'll see I've added a little bit of contingency as well. We already know we have to use the existing learning management system because out of scope is changing that, and all e-learning modules must be SCORM compliant. So we know that that was also a requirement, which is also a constraint. We can't do them any old way we like. They have to be SCORM compliant. And I've just put one thing here from the procurement side, that we have to use a preferred supplier, and that e-learning designer is a contractor and they're only available 30 hours per week. So all of my planning has to take that into consideration down track. I then have a couple of assumptions. So these are things that are out of control of the project team. So things we're not responsible for, we're relying on others, or some assumptions we're making that we're basing our planning on. So things we believe to be true. So the e-learning designer will be available during the required timeframes. We've made that assumption. And that all those different departments will provide timely input, review and feedback during the design and development phase. If they don't, we can't keep our project on track. So we're signalling to them to make sure that they give us timely feedback, so things that are out of our control. In this template is a summary of milestones. So yours may or may not have this. I've just picked them based on the deliverables. You can pick yours to whatever makes sense for you, but I just picked up the design and development phase being complete, the successful integration of those modules on the learning management system, and that the handover to L&D is complete. So I haven't put specific dates, but usually these are specific dates. But I would put a date for the first one, 2 months from the start date, and then 2 weeks after that would be when everything's on the learning management system, and then 2 weeks again after that, I'm presuming the handover would be complete. And this template has a little bit of a description there as well. I put the estimated budget. I've added a contingency here. So somewhere, speaking with some of the stakeholders, maybe they said, look, the budget's $25,000, but we've got a 10% buffer either way. And I've mentioned that here. The way I've done these costs is just on resources, as in human resources, so the project team and the e-learning designer. But just remember, resourcing could be anything. It could be consumables, facilities like room bookings or venues. You also might have equipment, laptops. Just think of any kind of resources that you might need and have a go at putting a cost to that. Sometimes these templates also ask for risks. If they do, it's usually the biggest risk, the risks to failure. So for example, that our funding gets pulled, maybe that the e-learnings don't work, that the e-learning designer is completely unavailable. What's the worst thing that could happen? You pick the top 3 things, and that's what goes in the charter. When you do a project plan, you become much more exhaustive about your risk. You usually produce a very big risk register, but for the charter, we just stick to the top couple of risks. At the very bottom is then the process for approval and an authorisation table as well. Usually you need to show that this is signed, that the project has been approved. So that's a project charter. And then once that is approved, key information from this will be put into the project plan. So when you get to the planning phase, you might copy and paste out the description, the objectives, the deliverables. Some of these things will go straight into the project plan, which will then also develop other areas like a more specific budget, a schedule or Gantt chart, like I mentioned, the risk register, procurement register, all different things to more fully plan out the project. But in initiation phase, this is enough just to understand the project, see what's involved, and know whether to approve it. So good luck in developing your project charter.